The wind stirred restlessly through the streets of Ouagadougou as the late afternoon sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows across the cracked pavement. The scent of dry earth mingled with the faint aroma of roasting peanuts from a nearby vendor. The city pulsed quietly with life, distant voices rising and falling like waves, the steady rhythm of footsteps, the occasional rattle of a passing cart. Yet amidst this daily hum, a solitary figure stood still, a beacon of burden and resolve against the restless backdrop. Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, wore the weight of his nation on his broad shoulders, his face, etched with lines, deeper than years alone could explain, reflected sleepless nights and battles fought on many fronts, political turmoil, insurgency, corruption. Yet beneath those marks of fatigue burned an unyielding flame, a fierce determination to stitch together hope where there was none. As he stepped down from the marble steps of the National Assembly, his mind tangled in a web of reports and strategies. A flicker of movement caught his eye at the edge of the crowd. There, seated on a dusty curb under the harsh gaze of the setting sun, was a boy no older than 7. His clothes hung in tatters, smeared with the grime of the streets, his small frame hunched over a faded piece of cardboard bearing a scrawled message. "Help my mother." The letters, shaky and uneven, told a story more urgent than any briefing or report. Traoré's gaze, locked with the boy's eyes, dark pools shimmering with the quiet desperation of a soul too young to carry such burdens. Time slowed. The bustling world around them blurred into insignificance. The boy's small chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, every line of his face a silent plea. The scene was raw and vivid, a portrait of innocence and suffering intertwined. Without hesitation, Traoré moved closer, the weight of his office melting away in the face of such simple, poignant need. He knelt down carefully, not wanting to frighten the child. "What is your name, little one?" he asked softly. "Kofi," the boy whispered, his voice fragile as a thread. "Where is your mother, Kofi?" Traoré pressed gently, his heart tightening. "She's very sick," Kofi murmured, voice cracking under the weight of his words. "She can't get out of bed. No medicine, no food, no one to help." Traoré reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of bread, the last morsel he had saved for his own hunger. "Here," he said, pressing it into Kofi's tiny hands. "Eat this first, then tell me everything." Kofi's eyes flickered with gratitude as he bit into the bread, crumbs falling onto the cracked pavement. Between chews, the boy's story spilled out. A mother overcome by fever, neighbors too poor or too frightened to lend a hand, a home crumbling under the weight of neglect and despair. The cardboard sign trembled slightly in his grasp, stained with the sweat and tears of relentless days. Traoré rose slowly, a renewed sense of purpose firming his spine. The problems facing his country were vast and complex, but here was a clear and urgent call, one he could not ignore. "Come with me," he said with resolve. "I will help your mother." The car ride was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound filling the space between them. Kofi's breaths were shallow and uneven, eyes flicking nervously around the vehicle. They arrived at a humble dwelling nestled between crumbling walls and tangled vines, the fading light casting long shadows on the weathered facade. Inside, a woman lay on a thin mattress, her face pale and slick with sweat, every breath labored and uneven. Her eyes fluttered weakly as Kofi approached, fingers trembling as he took her hand. "Mother," the boy whispered, voice filled with hope and fear mingled. Traoré knelt beside her, feeling the faint, fluttering pulse beneath his fingers. The illness was unmistakable, a high fever compounded by dehydration and weeks of neglect. He immediately summoned aid, personally ensuring her transport to a nearby clinic where she could receive the care she so desperately needed. But even as doctors took over, the true battle was only beginning. Over the next days, Traoré visited, often each time bringing medicine, food, and something more intangible, hope. The woman's strength slowly returned, a fragile bud blooming in the harsh soil of hardship. Kofi's guarded smile began to unfurl. The shadow of desperation lifted, replaced by cautious trust. In the quiet moments between visits, Traoré learned something that unsettled and inspired him in equal measure. The woman was no stranger. Years ago, before his ascent to leadership, she had been a schoolteacher in his village. The one who first taught him courage, kindness, and the dignity of small acts. Life had torn her apart. Her husband taken by violence, her home destroyed, and now her body racked by illness. The karmic threads of fate had woven their paths together once more, and Traoré's promise to save her felt both duty and redemption. One afternoon, as the fever finally broke and color returned to her cheeks, she opened her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Kofi squeezed her hand tightly, tears glimmering in his eyes. Traoré looked on, tears welling and spilling freely down his cheeks, overwhelmed by the weight of grace and survival. "You're not broken," he whispered. "You're becoming." Outside the hospital window, the first light of dawn crept softly across the city, bathing the world in a warm, hopeful glow. The streets began to stir, life pulsing anew as neighbors once distant gathered, sharing food and stories, rekindling the fragile flame of community. Even the hardened nurse, skeptical and worn by years of hardship, smiled quietly, touched by the subtle shift of hope. As Traoré returned to his office, he carried with him a small stone, a token of resilience and strength. He placed it carefully on his desk, a reminder that every life mattered. In that moment, beneath the weight of leadership and the shadows of struggle, he found a simple truth. True power lay in the smallest acts of kindness, and in the heart of a child with a cardboard sign. The promise of a nation's hope was born anew. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing for more inspiring tales of hope, healing, and unexpected kindness. Hit the like button and share this with someone who needs it today.